Mercedes just broke qualifying in Japan, and the FIA is already reacting. This wasn't just pole position. This was a front-row lockout, with a gap of almost 3/10 between teammates. In modern Formula One, that should not happen. But here's the part that's sending shockwaves through the paddock. Antonelli didn't just go fastest. He was fastest in every single sector. A perfect lap. The kind engineers almost never see, even from world champions. And when the data came in, it raised serious questions. Because in the fastest corners on the track, where every other car was losing energy, Mercedes had full power. No drop. No limitation. 3 races. 3 pole positions. 0 weaknesses. That's not just dominance. That's a problem. Because when one team removes the biggest limitation of the regulations, the sport doesn't just watch. It reacts. And now, the FIA is involved. Subscribe now, because what happens next could completely change the race before it even begins. Right after qualifying ended, everything changed. Not on track. Behind the scenes. Because while fans were still reacting to the lap, teams were already reacting to something else. The data. And the moment that data started circulating, the tone inside the paddock shifted instantly. From surprise to urgency. Engineers didn't celebrate. They didn't analyze their own laps. They went straight to Mercedes, overlaying telemetry, comparing sector by sector, looking for one simple thing, a weakness. And they couldn't find it. Because Mercedes wasn't just faster in one part of the lap. They were faster everywhere. Low-speed corners, high-speed sections, corner exits, straights. There was no drop in performance, no visible limitation. And that's the first thing that triggered alarm. Because in Formula One, that balance does not exist. Every car has a trade-off. More downforce means less top speed. More grip means more drag. Every gain comes with a cost. But Mercedes had no visible cost. And that's when the focus shifted to one critical area: energy. Because under these regulations, energy is everything. It defines how long you can push, where you can attack, where you have to hold back. And every team on the grid is fighting that limitation. Except one. Because when engineers looked closer, they noticed something very specific. Mercedes cars were arriving at key parts of the track with more energy available. Not sometimes. Every lap. Which allowed them to do something the others simply couldn't. Push flat out, without compromise. No early lift. No mid-lap saving. No drop at the end. Just continuous performance. And that should not be possible under the same rules. Because energy is supposed to be the limiting factor. The thing that forces drivers to manage. To choose. To sacrifice. But Mercedes didn't look like they were sacrificing anything. They looked unrestricted. And that's exactly why the FIA started paying attention. Not because of one lap. Not because of one result. But because of a pattern. 3 races. 3 pole positions. Front row lockouts. Gaps that are getting bigger, not smaller. And no clear explanation from the rest of the grid. That's when Formula One steps in. Not to accuse, but to understand. Because if one team has found a way to bypass the biggest limitation of the regulation, then the entire competitive balance is at risk. And that's where this story takes a serious turn. Because there is one moment in that lap, one specific section of Suzuka, where everything becomes impossible to ignore. And once you see it, you understand why the situation is escalating so quickly. There is one corner in Suzuka where the entire illusion breaks. One moment where every car shows its limit, and one team doesn't. 130R. Flat out. No margin. No second chance. This is where drivers either trust the car completely, or they lift. And this is exactly where everything became impossible to ignore. Because every other team showed the same pattern. A slight lift. A small correction. A drop in speed. Not dramatic, but enough. Because they had to manage energy. They had to protect the system. They were already running out. But Mercedes wasn't. They went through that corner flat. No hesitation. No instability. No sign of limitation. And when the data was analyzed, the difference was shocking. They carried significantly more speed than anyone else. Not by a small margin. By a gap that simply should not exist at this level. But here's the detail that changed everything. They did it without losing power. No clipping. No drop in deployment. Which means one thing. They arrived at the fastest part of the track, with full energy available. While every other car was already compromised. And that's where the concern turns into something much bigger. Because if you gain time there, you don't just gain in the corner. You gain all the way down the straight. Higher exit speed. Stronger acceleration. More top speed. It multiplies. Corner after corner. lap after lap. And Mercedes was winning every part of that sequence. But this is where it becomes even more serious. Because this isn't just about one corner. It's about how they arrive there. The preparation, the energy distribution, the precision across the entire lap. And according to the analysis, that's where Mercedes is untouchable. They are harvesting more efficiently, deploying more intelligently, arriving at key moments with more performance available. And that level of control is not something you fix with a small upgrade. It's built into the car, into the concept, into the philosophy. And that's exactly why the FIA is now involved. Because if one team has effectively solved the biggest limitation of the regulation, then the rest of the grid is not just behind. They are locked out. And Formula One cannot allow that gap to grow unchecked. But here's the twist. Even if the FIA steps in, even if something changes, that doesn't remove what Mercedes has built. Because this advantage is not coming from one single trick. It's coming from everything working together. And that leads to the final, uncomfortable question. If this is what Mercedes can do when everything works perfectly, what happens when they push even further? Because if this is not the limit, then what we saw in Japan might only be the beginning. And this is where everything becomes uncomfortable for the rest of the grid. Because up until now, there was still one hope. That this was just a perfect lap. One of those rare moments where everything aligns. Track conditions, tires, timing, execution. But the data says something very different. This wasn't a peak. It was a baseline. Because when teams compared long-run data, the gap didn't disappear. It stayed. Lap after lap. Consistent. Controlled. Unchanging. And that's the moment where concern turns into fear. Because a fast qualifying lap, you can explain. A fast race car is much harder to deal with. And right now, Mercedes has both. Because according to the numbers, they are not just faster over one lap. They are faster over distance. Almost a full second per lap ahead of Ferrari in race simulations. Over a full race distance. That becomes massive. Unrecoverable. No strategy can fix it. No pit stop can compensate for it. And that's when the reality hits every team on the grid. This is not something you catch quickly. This is not something you fix in the next race. This is structural. Built into the car. Built into the system. Built into everything Mercedes has designed for this regulation. And that's what forces Formula One to react. Because when one team gains this kind of advantage, it doesn't just win races. It controls the championship. And that's exactly what this is starting to look like. Not a battle. Not a fight. A controlled season. But here's where the pressure reaches its peak. Because now, the FIA is not just observing. They are evaluating. Looking at how this advantage is created. Looking at whether the interpretation of the rules matches the intent. Because sometimes, in Formula One, you don't need to break the rules to force a reaction. You just need to understand them better than everyone else. And that's exactly what Mercedes may have done. But here's the final layer. The one that changes everything. Because even if the FIA introduces clarifications, even if they adjust how certain systems can be used, that doesn't erase what Mercedes already understands. Because knowledge cannot be removed. Once you've built the concept, once you've unlocked the system, you are always ahead. And that's the real problem for the rest of the grid. They are not just chasing performance. They are chasing understanding. And those are two completely different battles. So now everything comes down to one final question. Not whether Mercedes is too fast. That part is already clear. The real question is this. Did they just win qualifying? Or did they just take control of the entire season before the race has even begun? And now, we reach the point where everything becomes unavoidable. Because there's a moment in every Formula One season when the narrative stops being speculation and becomes reality. And Japan might have been that moment. Because think about what this actually means. Mercedes is not just ahead in qualifying. They are ahead in race pace. They are ahead in consistency. They are ahead in understanding. And most importantly, they are ahead in a way the others cannot quickly copy. And that changes everything. Because Formula One is not just about being fast. It's about how fast you can respond. How fast you can adapt. How fast you can close the gap. But what happens when the gap isn't just performance? What happens when the gap is knowledge? Because that's what this looks like now. Mercedes didn't just build a fast car. They built the right car. For the regulation. For the system. For the future. And the rest of the grid might have built something else entirely. And that's the most dangerous situation in Formula One. Because if you're chasing the wrong concept, you're not just behind. You're lost. But here's where everything becomes even more intense. Because while the other teams are trying to understand, Mercedes is already thinking ahead, refining, improving, pushing the limits even further. And that creates a gap that doesn't stay stable. It grows, race after race, session after session. And that's how dominance becomes inevitable. Not through one breakthrough, but through continuous evolution, built on the right foundation. And this is exactly why the FIA's role becomes critical. Because at some point, the sport has to decide something. Do they let this play out naturally, even if it leads to one team controlling everything? Or do they step in, subtly, carefully, to protect competition? Because that line is very thin. Too much intervention, and you change the sport. Too little, and you risk losing the fight. And right now, Formula One is walking that line. But here's the final truth. The one that connects everything you've heard. What happened in Japan was not just a dominant qualifying session. It was a signal, a clear indication, that one team may have solved the most important puzzle of this new era. And once that happens, everything else becomes a reaction. So now the question is no longer about speed. It's not even about the FIA. It's about time. How much time does the rest of the grid have before this advantage becomes untouchable? Because if the answer is already too late, then what we're watching right now is not the start of a battle. It's the beginning of a season that might already have its ending written.